The Progressive Era by Murray Rothbard. Edited by Patrick Newman. Narrated by Graham Wright. Foreword by Andrew Napolitano. 3. Ethno-religious conflict and the rise of feminism. A. Women's suffrage. The successful restricting of immigration and of immigrant voting was still not enough to matter, and immigration would not really be foreclosed until the 1920s. But if voting could not be restricted sharply enough, perhaps it could be expanded, in the proper pietist direction. Specifically, it was clear to the pietists that the role of women in the liturgical ethnic family was very different from what it was in the pietist Protestant family. One of the reasons impelling pietists and republicans toward prohibition was the fact that culturally, the lives of urban male Catholics, and the cities of the Northeast were becoming increasingly Catholic, evolved around the neighbourhood saloon. The men would repair at night to the saloon for chit-chat, discussions and argument, and they would generally take their political views from the saloon keeper, who thus became the political powerhouse in his particular ward. Therefore, prohibition meant breaking the political power of the urban liturgical machines in the Democratic Party. But while the social lives of liturgical males revolved around the saloon, their wives stayed at home. While pietist women were increasingly independent and politically active, the lives of liturgical women revolved solely around home and hearth. Politics was strictly an avocation for husbands and sons. Perceiving this, the pietists began to push for women's suffrage, realizing that far more pietists than liturgical women would take advantage of the power to vote. Perhaps the major single organisation in the women's suffrage movement was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, founded in 1874 and reaching an enormous membership of 300,000 by 1900. That the WCTU was also involved in agitating for curfew, anti-gambling, anti-smoking and anti-sex laws, all actions lauded by the women's suffrage movement, is clear from the official history of women's suffrage in the 19th century. Not only did Susan B. Anthony begin her career as a professional prohibitionist, but her two successors as president of the leading women's suffrage organization, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, Mrs. Carrie Chapman Catt and Dr. Anna Howard Shaw, also began their professional careers as prohibitionists. The leading spirit of the WCTU, Frances E. Willard, was prototypically born of New England stock parents who had moved westward to study at Oberlin College, then the nation's centre of aggressive evangelical pietism, and had later settled in Wisconsin. Guided by Miss Willard, the WCTU began its pro-suffrage activities by demanding that women vote in local option referendums on prohibition. As Miss Willard put it, the WCTU wanted women to vote on this issue because majorities of women are against the liquor traffic. Conversely, whenever there was a voters' referendum on women's suffrage, the liturgicals and the foreign-born, responding to immigrant culture and reacting against the pietist feminist support of prohibition, consistently opposed women's suffrage. In Iowa, the Germans voted against women's suffrage, as did the Chinese in California. The women's suffrage amendment in 1896 in California was heavily supported by the bitterly anti-Catholic American Protective Association. The cities, where Catholics abounded, tended to be opposed to women's suffrage, while pietist rural areas tended to favour it. Thus, the Oregon referendum of 1900 lost largely because of opposition in the Catholic slums of Portland and Astoria. And testifying before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in favour of women's suffrage in 1880, Susan B. Anthony presented her own explanation of the Colorado vote. Quote, "In Colorado, 6,666 men voted yes. Now I'm going to describe the men who voted yes. They were native-born men, temperance men, cultivated, broad, generous, just men, men who think. On the other hand, 16,007 voted no. Now I'm going to describe that class of voters. In the southern part of that state are Mexicans, who speak the Spanish language. The vast population of Colorado is made up of that class of people. I was sent out to speak in a voting precinct having 200 voters. 150 of those voters were Mexican greasers, 40 of them foreign-born citizens, and just 10 of them were born in this country. And I was supposed to be competent to convert those men to let me have so much right in this government as they had. No sooner had Wyoming Territory adopted women's suffrage than it became evident that the change had benefited the Republicans, particularly since women had mobilized against Democratic attempts to repeal Wyoming's Sunday prohibition law. In 1871, both houses of the Wyoming legislature, led by its Democratic members, voted to repeal women's suffrage, but the bill was vetoed by the Republican territorial governor.